Brian Thomas to the moon. We'll tell you why in this episode on the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Kate, the NFL Combine is officially underway. We've got some drills coming up on Thursday. We'll have quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers working out on Saturday. But one of the big things from the Combine recently isn't necessarily the on-field workouts, because very few players are actually working out anymore. It's more the media availabilities that we get from head coaches, offensive coordinators, GMs. And there were some interesting takeaways. Let's start with Brian Thomas, because I think we got some interesting stuff on Brian Thomas.
All right. So new Jaguars head coach Liam Cohen took the stage here at the Combine. And man, if the biggest takeaway was not that Brian Thomas Jr. is about to have probably one of the best seasons of any wide receiver in the National Football League right now. Like, I don't know what it is, because it seems like there is a very established and firm plan to railroad that offense through Brian Thomas Jr. and utilize him in pretty much any way that's going to get him some easy layups, put the ball in his hands, and let us score fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't be more excited about Brian Thomas. And one of the things, like, I like to watch the facial expressions from these coaches, because a lot of times what these coaches and GMs are saying doesn't necessarily match what their faces are telling you. They
psychology, man.
Well, I mean, we'll get into this in a little bit, but like, you could watch like John Lynch's body language talking about Brandon Ayuk, and you can tell like he's not in love. They love Brian Thomas. Like, they think
there's a twinkle in his eyes.
Yeah, there really was. Like, Liam Cohen like couldn't stop smiling. And I think he's just like overjoyed to coach a talent like Brian Thomas. And I think this is smart. I think they're going to try to figure out ways to get him the ball easier so he can be more dynamic. He's not just a downfield threat. He is somebody that's really dangerous with the ball in his hands. And whether you're doing that on slants or stop routes or however you can to get him the ball, it seems like Jacksonville is going to try to build their offense around him rather than him just being a complementary piece like he was at times last year.
Yeah, and I think this is the smart move. And you know what? Anybody who rosters Brian Thomas Jr. in dynasty leagues, they're probably going to have that same twinkle in their eye for a long time. Now, as a rookie, Brian Thomas Jr. averaged 2.45 yards per route run. That ranked sixth among 131 qualifying wide receivers. We know that that is a pretty sticky stat in terms of just predicting how you are going to, use the opportunities that you receive. Yards after the catch per reception, 87th percentile among wide receivers. Yeah. Again, as a rookie, this is a guy who is immensely explosive, has, the height, 6'4", 205 pounds. He's only 22 years old. And we had that year one breakout, despite the fact that there was often, Mac Jones throwing him the ball. I think all of these numbers tell you something really special about what we're about to see from Brian Thomas Jr. He's already valued as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. I don't know that his value can get any higher, but it sure feels like it should.
It's just, how do you put him ahead of some of the names that are ahead of him? But I mean, I think there is a chance that we see him starting to be used more like the CeeDee Lambs, the Jamar Chase, the Justin Jeffersons, like the receivers that are ahead of him. I think we just have to see it before we can start ranking him that high. But I agree with you. Like, his value is, I don't want to say maxed out, but it's about as high as it'll ever get. But if you have Brian Thomas in your dynasty leagues, this is like music to your ears. Like this is everything you're hoping that would happen with him when you drafted him probably in the late first round of your rookie drafts. This is fantastic news for one of the league's premier weapons. I can't wait to see what it looks like.
It's going to be something. Now, I want to share some stats from Fantasy Points Data at Fantasy PTS Data on X, formerly Twitter. Had a really awesome Brian Thomas Jr. stat that I think perfectly encapsulates why him getting some of these generated touches, playing more out of the slot is going to be so beneficial. As a rookie, BTJ averaged 3.25 yards per route run from the slot. That led out of all 71 qualifying wide receivers. He was the best. He had the 5th highest average separation score from the slot. Again, out of those 71 qualifying wide receivers. When he was playing out wide, 2.28 yards per route run, still great, ranked 16th, ranked 26th in average separation score on the outside. But like the slot is such a nice cheat code to get these guys some quick separation that like, yeah, you get the ball in their hands. And then with the kind of speed that Brian Thomas Jr. has, he takes it to the house. Like,
yeah.
It's so simple. Wish we had thought of it sooner. I don't know. We got some pretty solid production here as a rookie, but I think this is great news, not just for Brian Thomas Jr., but let's talk about what it does for a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who, I mean, the value has plummeted. I don't really think you can get any lower in terms of value for a former number 1 overall pick being drafted right now. QB 23 in dynasty startups, courtesy of dynastyleaguefootball.com. Woof. Like,
you mean future Steelers quarterback Trevor Lawrence for like a hot minute on X?
Yeah. RIP. That was like the best 3 hours of my life.
You guys
Trevor
almost
Lawrence,
had a quarterback.
He's not going anywhere. But you know what? I think this is going to do wonders for Trevor Lawrence and just make things a little bit easier. The same way that, getting Brian Thomas some layups over the middle of the field is good for, him generating yards after the catch, generating separation. That also makes life so much easier on your quarterback when you have a guy that has the kind of size he has with the kind of speed he has. You're giving him a cheat code that I think is going to raise his ceiling considerably, but also raise his floor.
The only question I have about Trevor Lawrence is who are the other receivers in this offense? Because if you listen to Liam Cohen talk, it seems like the status of like Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk are both up in the air. They actually mentioned Brenton Strange, their young tight end that they drafted from Penn State, who I think was the 2023 draft. He could have a bigger role in offense, but I want to see what the rest of the playmakers look like on this offense. But you're right. If Trevor Lawrence is healthy and they're using Brian Thomas in more ways to get him the football, this is just going to be a better offense. And everything that Liam Cohen has said so far, whether it's about Lawrence, whether it's about Brian Thomas Jr., or just the general direction of this offense, has me excited about their potential. Now, I don't think it's going to be a top 5 offense in the NFL, but I don't think it's going to be one of the worst like we saw last year either. So I'm trying to buy as many Jacksonville players as I can, just because I think you're going to see a big rise in value from now into early parts of the season.
Yep. Bye.
Okay, let's talk about maybe, well, at least what I thought was the most interesting news coming out of the NFL Combine. Let's talk about Mark Andrews next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We're talking about the latest news coming out of the NFL Combine. And Kate, one thing that stood out to me is the way that the Ravens GM, Eric DeCosta, spoke about Mark Andrews. It was one of these things, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but one of these things that it's like, hey, we really appreciate everything that Mark Andrews has done. He's been a great player for this team, but we'll see him later. Like it sure seems like the Ravens are planning on moving on from Mark Andrews this offseason. That's part number one. Part number two is I think one of the reasons why they're comfortable moving on is because of who's backing him up right now.
He said, there's no bigger fan of Mark Andrews than me.
You might as well just say he's being traded. Like that's how that thing gets Go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt.
that tells you everything you need to know. I love having Mark on the team. Then why are we having this conversation? No, duh, you love having Mark Andrews on the team. Said we're really blessed to have 3 really good tight ends under contract this year. They all contribute in different ways. Their chemistry, their camaraderie, blah, 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 blah. What I'm hearing is that they really like Isaiah Likely, which I think is a very fair point because Isaiah Likely is a guy that, occasionally when Mark Andrews has been healthy, kind of dissipates into the ether. But when asked to play a full-time role in the offense, when he's asked to run routes, he does nothing but produce. Like, if you can have a guy like Isaiah Likely on a rookie contract versus paying a older tight end who's, been banged up a little bit, like, why wouldn't you? It makes sense.
One of the things that we noticed early in the year is that the offense just felt so much faster when Isaiah Likely was on the field. And I know if you look at like Isaiah Likely's testing numbers, it doesn't support that, but you know what I mean? Like you watch these games and they were just a much more dynamic offense with Isaiah Likely on the field instead of Mark Andrews. I still think Mark Andrews has a lot of value. And I think if he gets traded, which I'm in the camp that I think he is going to get traded, I think the team that makes the most sense is trading him to the Chargers, Kate, where he is reunited with his former offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, and he goes from one Harbaugh brother to the other. The Chargers have a massive need at tight end. This is not a good class of tight ends in free agency. I think the Ravens are going to want to make sure someone like Mark Andrews lands in a favorable situation. But I honestly think they're more concerned about how do we lock up Isaiah Likely to a long-term deal, because pairing him with Zay Flowers, with Lamar Jackson is how we want this offense to function moving forward.
Yeah, I think, looking at Mark Andrews, there probably is no better fit. We've been looking at the Chargers, I feel like every single year as a candidate to be all in on a tight end. Now, this seems to make more sense as a fit than other previous speculations have. You mentioned the tie to Greg Roman. There has been pretty much no type. The archetype of a Los Angeles Chargers is, have you formerly played for the Baltimore Ravens? If yes, you may proceed to the next level of your interview. And that, I think they want players that are familiar with that offensive system. Mark Andrews, obviously very successful playing in that offensive system. But I think one stat that's kind of just telling of Mark Andrews and where he's at in his career, despite playing 17 games, posted a career high in terms of receiving touchdowns. But can you guess how many games Mark Andrews had with 70 plus receiving yards this year?
Oh, maybe one.
0. It was 0.
Yeah, it was rough. And I don't think the playoff game against the Bills is the reason why they're moving on. That was the worst game I've ever seen Mark Andrews play. He had multiple drops, including the 2-point conversion. He had a fumble. I just think that they realized that this is a player who has already peaked and he's starting to decline physically, and he's just not dynamic enough in the middle of the field. And I think we should try to move on now while he still has value. He just didn't look like the same player. He's still a good player, but not the one that the Ravens have become accustomed to having.
Yeah, I think what we saw over, let's say, 2022 to 2023 was a player that just had a lot more, yardage upside. And of course, he was sometimes getting 10 plus targets a game. That's going to help you get there. But I still think, generally speaking, we saw this, just slower version overall of Mark Andrews. Now, I do think that, maybe that car accident that he was in ahead of the season played into the slower start that he had, was kind of brushed under the rug a little bit. And then, I think when he was active, I don't even think it crossed anybody's minds that could still be contributing to maybe, the way he's moving or his role in the offense. But all things considered, Mark Andrews, when tied to a player like Justin Herbert, which If I could
Great.
put money down on it, Marcus, I would put money down on Andrews to the Chargers.
Yeah.
Like, he's 29 years old. He's still got plenty left in the tank, I think, especially if you're going to pair him with a quarterback. Man, imagine big, tall man to big, tall man over the middle of the field in the end zone. Like, this is going to be, I think, I'm just getting ahead of myself here, but the fit there is absolutely tremendous. And I do think that that's a place that Mark Andrews would maintain his dynasty value. You're not, losing anything in terms of like the quarterback conversation. Justin Herbert, one of the top quarterbacks in the National Football League. I think it would be just kind of a win-win-win-win.
The thing is, I think if Andrews were to land with Herbert, I could see Andrews being a top 3 tight end in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I want to know more, Kate, about is if Andrews were to be dealt, when he is dealt, let me rephrase that. How highly are you ranking Isaiah Likely? Because I've got to assume the Ravens are going to want to lock up Isaiah Likely to a contract sooner rather than later. He's going into the final year of his deal. Where would you rank Isaiah Likely among dynasty tight ends if Andrews is traded?
I'm not being hyperbolic here. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. Tight end 5, behind Brock Bowers, McBride, Laporta, and Hawkinson.
I mean,
period.
That's exactly where I would put him as well. I mean, you've got him in an offense where he's going to be the sole tight end with a good quarterback, with an offense that loves to use the tight end. I don't think that's a stretch at all.
No, I mean, I will say the tier break off between, even Mark Andrews right now, consensus tight end 5 in Dynasty. He's 25 years old. I'll put Isaiah Likely ahead of him, stepping into that Mark Andrews role.
Well, who are the tight ends behind?
That's
Likely?
What's so interesting. Dalton Kincaid. Okay, I still don't know what to do with Dalton Kincaid.
I'm taking Likely.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. But I'm saying, like, are we still doing this with Dalton Kincaid? I don't know. George Kittle, 31 years old. Tucker Kraft, who knows?
No thanks.
Travis Kelce, who knows? David Njoku, I think, is a little low here, considering some of the question marks ahead
The problem
of him.
that Njoku has is the quarterback, right? Like, I like Njoku as a player more than Isaiah Likely, and he's still very young. I would have Njoku ahead of some of the other names you mentioned, but like, if it's named Kirk Cousins throwing the ball to David Njoku versus Lamar Jackson throwing to Isaiah Likely, give me Likely.
Absolutely. Pat Freiermuth, Kyle Pitts.
Yuck.
I mean, what are we doing here? I definitely think it becomes a lot easier to stomach the idea of Isaiah Likely as tight end 5 in Dynasty when you consider the names he would be drafted ahead of, and then it starts to click.
Buy Isaiah Likely now before the value just goes to the roof.
Woo!
I don't even know if you're going to be able to trade for him because everybody is so excited, but I would love to hear about some potential deals that are getting done right now for the soon-to-be superstar tight end in Baltimore. Kate, let's talk about some quarterback problems for the Colts. Nothing new for them at all. What's going to happen with Anthony Richardson? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez. They do a great job covering all the draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's talk about the Colts. The rumblings out of Indianapolis are that they are sticking with Anthony Richardson, but they're going to add some competition. I don't think this is going to be a situation where they bring back someone like Joe Flacco. I don't think they're going to bring in a Russell Wilson at age 37, right? I think they're going to try to bring in a real legitimate starting quarterback to compete with Richardson. What are your thoughts on this situation?
I think this kind of plays into a lot of the concerns we've had about Anthony Richardson here so far throughout his career. Now, he has missed 17 of 34 career games this year, or to this point in his career. He's been banged up. He's had concussions. He's had the shoulder issue. Like, nothing has gone right for Anthony Richardson. But when you finally saw him on the football field, like, there was a lack of progression there that was concerning, I think. Pretty dang concerning overall. Now, You look at the accurate throw rate, Marcus, out of all quarterbacks with 100 plus pass attempts in the 2024 season, he ranked dead last with just 46.1% of his throws being deemed accurate per PFF. 46.1%. Now, the second lowest, that was Cooper Rush at 49.1%.
Whoa.
Dorian Thompson-Robinson at 49.5%. Those were the only three quarterbacks that had a sub 50% accurate throw rate per PFF. Uncatchable and accurate throw rate, even more concerning for me. 33.6% of his pass attempts were deemed uncatchable / inaccurate. Because there are times where, right, you can throw an inaccurate ball, but like it's still in a good enough spot where your playmakers can make a play. That wasn't the case for Anthony Richardson. 33.6%. The next highest uncatchable and accurate throw rate, 26.7%. That was Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Behind that, 23.8%, Drew Lock. That is almost a full 10 percentage points that Anthony Richardson had on Drew Lock. And, I think we can all agree that, like, yeah, the Colts don't have the best wide receiver core in the league, but I don't think they had a bad one, right? Like Michael Pittman banged up, yes. Josh Downs banged up, yes. AD Mitchell, question mark, but upside. Like, I don't think they have a great group, but I don't think they have a bad one. And I think all of these things are bringing into focus the question marks that this team very rightfully has, because Shane Steichen came in and we saw what he did for Jalen Hurts, right? There were all these physical tools, there were these physical gifts, but how do we put these all together to establish some efficiency in the passing game? It just hasn't translated to Anthony Richardson here.
I've kind of just given up on Anthony Richardson being a fantasy relevant quarterback just because the accuracy is so bad. I understand the rushing potential. I don't see a world in which he turns into a franchise quarterback. So to me, it's a little fool's gold here. I think the more interesting thing is what type of quarterback are the Colts bringing in? Kate, is it somebody that they draft? Like, are they going up to try to get a Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward? Probably not. And there's not really a quarterback after those guys that you feel great about. Maybe they draft like a Tyler Shuck in the second round, who is a 26-year-old pocket passer. But I got to believe it's going to be somebody who can win from the pocket. And I think if you are a Michael Pittman or a Donnie Mitchell or Josh Downs dynasty manager, I think that's what you want. Like somebody that's just going to stand in the pocket and throw the ball. The problem is who is that quarterback? Like, who is the quarterback that's going to be available that's going to come in and give you that? I don't know. Maybe they try to get Gardner Minshew back, who helped them win 9 games in 2023. It just feels like a really bad situation because here's what I don't want to have happen, Kate. I don't think bringing in Justin Fields and giving him 2 years, $30 million really does enough. Richardson and Fields are too similar of a quarterback. And I don't think that gets you to where you ultimately want to go. So the Colts are in a tough spot, and I'm very curious to see what they end up doing.
I mean, yeah, definitely a tough spot. Now, despite the fact that, Marcus, there wasn't a single game this year where Anthony Richardson had fewer than 24 rushing yards, which I know isn't a lot, but like for a quarterback to have that kind of floor, that's 2.4 fantasy points. Just set it and forget it that you get to add to whatever score your quarterback comes up with through the ground, through the air, whatever. Despite that, he still scored fewer than 14 fantasy points in 7 of 11 games. Do you know how wild it is to have that kind of rushing ceiling, but post that kind of floor? Like, there were 4 games of 56 plus rushing yards for Anthony Richardson this year. 4 games, okay? Yep. He scored fewer than 13 fantasy points in 2 of them. That tells you how low the ceiling is for him as a passer. So I think the Colts are playing this correctly. I think they have to start making contingency plans because it's not just the question of like, is he the guy we thought he was? It's also the question of like, can he stay healthy? And the answer's been no so far. So they've got a lot to work through, but I do think this year in particular proved to me that the ceiling and floor isn't exactly what we expected for Anthony Richardson based on his physical skill set. He's still only 22 years old, but like QB 18 right now in the most recent batch of Dynasty
Where's
startup
Trevor
ADP,
Lawrence being drafted again?
behind him, QB 23. Like,
that's
give me
what's
Trevor
silly.
Lawrence 45 times out of 45 because
Like,
he's
Lawrence
still got a
just
safer floor.
Yeah, and he just signed a long-term contract. Like, he's gonna and with Trevor Lawrence being the number 1 overall pick, like, he's gonna get chances after chance after chance, right? Even if this thing doesn't work out in Jacksonville, I truly wonder, like, if Anthony Richardson gets benched halfway through the season, will he ever start another game? Maybe, and usually guys that are drafted inside the top 5 do. There's just a lot more safety in Trevor Lawrence, and frankly, I'm even wondering now if Trevor Lawrence has a higher ceiling, because if Anthony Richardson can't become an even a below average NFL passer, what are we doing here?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to preview another running back, another Ohio State running back, actually, Quinshawn Judkins, who is widely expected to be drafted on day 2 of the NFL draft. We'll discuss his profile, where we see him landing, his dynasty value. Go download the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.